David's world. When David captured the fortress of Jerusalem, the city was already very old. This is not an exaggeration, but a judgment. When we say that a city is ancient, we are not merely describing its age. We are acknowledging that the facts about it have already become too numerous to be fully told. Here, history is not a single line, but layers upon layers of traces. Each layer covers the one before it, yet never truly erases it. Jerusalem is precisely such a place. Before David, it was not the capital of a kingdom, nor was it particularly prominent. It did not lie on the main trade routes. It did not control fertile plains, nor was it directly connected to maritime civilizations. It was more like a fortress surrounded by valleys, cliffs, and high ground. Isolated and closed, yet stubbornly persistent. From a geographical perspective, it scarcely qualified to become the center of history. From the perspective of historical outcomes, however, it has repeatedly stood at the center of the world's narrative. That in itself is a question. A city illogical, yet impossible to ignore. Jerusalem lay between Mediterranean civilization and the civilizations of Mesopotamia, yet it deliberately deviated from the most convenient routes. The coastal plain was the preferred corridor for caravans, armies, and imperial expansion, but Jerusalem stood nearly 30 miles away from that passage, hidden in the hills. This meant it was rarely passed by, yet frequently fought over. Winters were cold, summers intensely hot. Mountain roads were steep, supplies difficult. An unremarkable spring, the Gihon, became the lifeline on which the entire city depended. Whoever controlled the water controlled the city's survival. For this reason, what first appeared here were not grand palaces, but underground channels, massive walls, and defensive structures. From its birth, Jerusalem did not exist for expansion, but to be held. Here, a city was not first a form of wealth, but an obsession. Facts are discontinuous, memory is not. Our knowledge of Jerusalem does not come from a continuous historical record, but from scattered fragments, pottery, remains of walls, tombs, broken inscriptions, and later the text that spans 1,000 years, the Bible. These materials do not attempt to assemble a complete history. They are more like fires lit at different moments in time, briefly illuminating an instant before going out. Between these lights lies long silence. For this reason, any account of Jerusalem must carry restraint. We can confirm only those facts repeatedly attested. For the rest, uncertainty must be allowed to remain. And yet it is precisely these blank spaces that give the city its extraordinary weight. The Canaanite city and the earliest Jerusalem. As early as 5000 BCE, human activity was present in these highlands. By the early Bronze Age, Jericho had already become a fortified city, while Jerusalem remained only a settlement organized around its water source. In Egyptian and Near Eastern documents, a name appears, Jerusalem. This name did not directly point to political power, but to a deity. It most likely derived from Shalem, a god associated with dusk and order, meaning Shalem has founded, or Shalem has established. This suggests that before Jerusalem became a political center, it was first a religious and symbolic anchor. It was remembered not because it was powerful, but because it was endowed with meaning. A city as something guarded. The Canaanites cut through rock around the Gihon spring, channeling water into the city and constructing concealed underground passages. They built walls several meters thick, not to conquer others, but to prevent their own lifeline from being severed. Here, water was not merely a resource, but destiny. The city's premise was not expansion, but continuity. This conception of the city profoundly influenced all peoples who later entered it. Jerusalem has never been a city that can be easily taken. It demands a long-term cost. Vassalage, fear, and the first complete voice. In the 15th century BCE, Egypt controlled Canaan, and Jerusalem became a vassal city-state. In the famous Amarna letters, a message from Abdi-Heba, king of Jerusalem, to Pharaoh preserves the city's first complete self-expression. The original text says, "I fall at the feet of my Lord, my king, 7 times and 7 times." The king's land is falling into the hands of the Habiru. If the king does not send archers, this city will no longer exist. There is no rhetoric here, only fear. Language is not narration, but survival. The Habiru were not a nation, but a condition. Disorderly, mobile, unrecognized, yet impossible to ignore. This was Jerusalem's first realization that walls cannot prevent the loss of meaning. The Dark Age and a new mode of narrative. Soon afterward, the entire Mediterranean world collapsed. Empires disintegrated, trade networks broke, cities declined. Historians call it the Bronze Age collapse. In this long and chaotic period, a group of tribes practicing monotheism settled in the highlands of Canaan. They did not build identity through cities, but through narrative. They recorded history not to reconstruct events, but to answer a question: who are we? Thus the Pentateuch emerged, a God who refuses to be named. In these narratives, God does not rush to explain the world. When Moses asked for a name, the reply was, "I am who I am." This is not a definition, but a boundary. It refuses to be absorbed into existing linguistic systems. The relationship formed between this people and their God was not built upon land or city, but upon response. Faith was not possession, but ongoing dialogue. Yet the city remained. The stage is set. Archaeology cannot fully prove whether the Israelites conquered Jerusalem by force, but it can confirm that they established numerous unwalled villages in the highlands, a way of life gradually forming between nomadism and settlement. They carried law, the ark, memory, and story. Jerusalem was not their earliest center, yet it always remained within their field of vision, and change was approaching. David's world did not begin in a palace. It unfolded in a wilderness that was not quiet. There were flocks, wind, recurring danger, and daily life repeatedly confirmed. David grew up here without a king's perspective, without a general's map. His understanding of the world came from a lower position, from guarding, waiting, and making solitary judgments when no one was watching. The original text says, "A person truly comes to know the world not when he is told about it, but when he bears the consequences alone." Within his family, David was not prominent. He was neither the eldest nor the expected heir. He was placed at the margins. This was not humiliation, but assumption. It was precisely in being overlooked that he formed a complete worldview. Order does not always come from the center. Meaning does not necessarily attach itself to authority. Saul's world, legitimacy as burden. Meanwhile, Israel's world was tightening. Saul was already king. Tall and strong, he matched every expectation of what a king should be. For that very reason, he was acutely sensitive to loss. His fear did not arise from weakness, but from awareness. He knew that kingship must be continually affirmed. When the Philistines sent out Goliath, it was not merely a challenge, but a language. Strength itself became an argument. The Israelite army did not flee, yet it stalled. Fear did not erupt, but was rationalized. The original text says, "When fear is accepted as reasonable, it takes on the appearance of rationality." The confrontation of two worlds. David did not appear as a warrior. He entered the camp carrying food, unrelated to the battle. It was precisely this irrelevance that allowed him to see the gap. Why did no one respond? This was not a tactical question, but a question of meaning. Saul saw risk. David saw silence. Saul calculated cost. David refused the default. When armor was placed upon him, the system was attempting to correct an anomaly. But the armor prevented him from acting. The original text says, A tool that cannot be used naturally will, in itself, alter the purpose. He removed the armor not as a rejection of protection, but as a refusal to enter the world in someone else's way. Where does decisiveness come from? When David faced Goliath, they did not inhabit the same world. Goliath believed that sufficient strength would eliminate the problem. David believed that if no one responds, strength itself is already failure. The moment the stone flew, the outcome was decided, not because it struck, but because the judgment had already been completed. A new narrative begins to take shape. After the victory, songs began to circulate. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Language entered public space, and power felt uneasy for the first time. The original text says, "When meaning is no longer monopolized by power, power begins to fear." David did not immediately become king. He entered a more dangerous stage. He was seen, but not yet placed. Chapter 3, Part 2. The Kingdom and the Temple. Solomon, the triumph of institution, the failure of man. When Solomon ascended the throne, Israel was no longer a fragile tribal confederation. David's wars had secured borders, safety, and prestige for the kingdom. Yet these achievements still depended on personal charisma and military strength. Once war ceased, the instability of such a structure began to show. The question Solomon faced was not how to continue conquering, but something more difficult. How can a kingdom built on war survive in peace? His answer was institution. Administrative reform. Traditional Israelite society was organized around the 12 tribes. Kinship, ancestry, and land shaped the people's understanding of the world. But in Solomon's view, this structure could not sustain a long-term monarchy. So he bypassed the tribal system and reorganized the country into 12 administrative districts. These districts were no longer named after tribes, but defined by supply responsibility. Each district was responsible for providing for the royal court for 1 month of the year. This was a fundamental shift. From that point on, people were no longer merely members of a tribe, but became parts of a national supply system. The state began to function in a calm, continuous, and calculable manner. Yet within this efficiency, alienation quietly emerged. Corvée and construction, grandeur built on invisible burden. The temple, the royal palace, defensive fortifications, store cities. These projects appear solemn and necessary in the historical record. Yet in reality, they meant that large amounts of labor were continuously drawn away from ordinary life. The system of forced labor was not invented by Solomon, but under him it reached an unprecedented level of institutionalization and scale. Non-Israelite populations bore much of the burden, while Israelites themselves were gradually incorporated into the administrative structure. The smoother the projects advanced, the stronger the state appeared. But in fields and households within tribes, fatigue and resentment began to accumulate. These emotions were not recorded, they were merely suppressed. Tyre and Hiram, the temple was not a native product. Historical materials repeatedly emphasize one fact. The key resources for the temple came almost entirely from outside Israel. Cedar from Lebanon, Phoenician craftsmen, metallurgical and architectural expertise, maritime and commercial experience, all entered Jerusalem through Hiram, king of Tyre. This was a strategic alliance, but also a profound dependence. The temple thus became a symbol, not only the religious center of Israel, but also a sign of the international system embedded within the local sphere. From that moment on, Israel was no longer an isolated nation, but was drawn into a broader network of the world. The true function of the temple, the centralization and administration of faith. Before the temple was built, the presence of God was mobile. The tabernacle moved with the people. Faith was closely intertwined with daily life. The temple changed this. God was placed in a fixed location. Sacrificial rites were centrally administered. Access to God was institutionalized. This provided immense stability for the state. Religious authority and royal authority reinforced one another. Faith became the source of legitimacy for order. At the same time, faith was for the first time firmly embedded within the structure of power. Opposition to the king gradually came to be understood as deviation from divine will. The display of wisdom, judgment, and the construction of authority. The story of the two women disputing over a child is often regarded as a symbol of wisdom, but in political context, it appears more like a carefully staged demonstration of authority. Through his judgment, Solomon was not merely resolving a dispute, he was declaring to the entire kingdom. The authority to define justice rests in the hands of the king. From then on, wisdom became the central narrative of rule. And when wisdom became personalized, institutions receded into the background. Wealth and temptation, the world enters Jerusalem. Trade expanded. Fleets sailed the Red Sea. Gold and treasures flowed continuously into the capital. Israel reached an unprecedented level of prosperity. But the world brought not only wealth, but also a mixing of values. Political marriages, foreign religions, cultural compromises gradually appeared. Solomon was not unaware of the risks, but he chose political pragmatism. The problem was this: when compromise becomes the norm of governance, wisdom begins to erode its own foundation. The silent people, the unwritten history. The historical record says little about the common people. There were no uprisings recorded, no cries, only scattered complaints. Yet this very silence reveals the seriousness of the situation. The stronger the state became, the more voiceless the individual. The more perfected the institutions, the less space there was for emotion. All pressure was deferred to the future. The philosophical end: why wisdom could not prevent division. Solomon's tragedy did not lie in a lack of wisdom. It lay in his belief that wisdom could indefinitely delay the cost. He completed the state, but neglected identity. He stabilized order, but overdrawn endurance. Thus, when his son faced the people, it required only a single harsh sentence for the kingdom to fracture immediately. Not because rebellion suddenly occurred, but because division had already been written into the structure itself. Beneath the temple, cracks had already formed. The temple was Solomon's greatest achievement and the heaviest legacy he left behind. It symbolized the centralization of faith, the completion of power, the maturity of the state. It also symbolized the loss of flexibility and the accumulation of cost. When golden light illuminated Jerusalem, the kingdom appeared to stand at its peak. In reality, it had already run out of retreat.